Parents took my emergency savings to bail out my sister, then asked why I couldn't help them anymore. I want to start by saying I never thought my own parents would steal from me. Not steal in the dramatic headline sense, no masks, no getaway car. Just a quiet transfer made with a login they weren't supposed to have anymore, justified afterward with the kind of calm that only comes from people who've never once considered they might be wrong. My name's Ryan, I'm 31. 3 months ago, I found out my parents drained $14,200 from my emergency fund to bail out my younger sister, and when I finally stopped bailing them out afterward, they had the audacity to ask me why I'd suddenly become so selfish. Let me back up, because you need the whole picture to understand how something like this even becomes possible. I've been the responsible one in my family since I was about 12 years old. My sister Ashley is 2 years younger than me, and from the time we were kids there was a very clear split in how we were treated. I'm not saying this out of bitterness, I'm saying it because it's relevant to literally everything that happened later. If Ashley forgot her homework, it was because she was creative, and big-picture thinkers don't do well with rigid systems. If I forgot my homework, which for the record happened maybe twice in my entire academic career, I got a lecture about responsibility that could have qualified as a TED Talk. Ashley crashed the family car at 17. Totaled it actually pulling out of a gas station without looking. My parents were furious for about a day, and then it became a funny story they'd tell at Thanksgiving. Remember when Ashley took out the Sorensens' mailbox and their rose bushes? Big laughs all around. I got a B+ in AP Calculus my senior year, and my dad didn't speak to me for 2 days. I'm telling you this not to relitigate my childhood, but because it explains why when I turned 18 I became obsessed with financial independence. Some kids rebel with drugs or tattoos. I rebelled by opening a high-yield savings account and reading personal finance blogs until 1 a.m. It was, in its own strange way, my form of control. If I couldn't control how my parents saw me, I could control my own stability. I worked through college, a mix of an IT help desk job and freelance web design, graduated with almost no debt, and by the time I was 26 I had a stable job as a systems analyst making decent money. I lived below my means. I drove a 2014 Honda Civic with 140,000 miles on it that I could have replaced years ago. I meal prepped instead of eating out. And I built slowly and deliberately an emergency fund, not just some savings, an actual fully funded 6 months of expenses emergency fund sitting in a high-yield savings account untouched, growing. By the time the story starts, it had grown to just over $14,000. That number mattered to me in a way that's hard to explain to people who've never had money anxiety. It wasn't just a number, it was proof that I could take care of myself. Proof that the version of security my parents never quite gave me emotionally, I could give myself financially. Ashley, meanwhile, took a different path, not a worse one necessarily, just different, and one that came with a lot more financial turbulence. She dropped out of a marketing program after 2 years, tried a couple of business ventures, a candle company, then a personal styling service that never quite got off the ground, and has had over the last decade what I generously call a complicated relationship with money. My parents, Mike and Jennifer, have bailout her out more times than I can count. A car repair here, a missed rent payment there. Credit card debt paid off just this once, except just this once happened at least 4 times that I know of. I never resented Ashley for needing help. For what it's worth, people struggle. What I resented quietly for years was the difference in how our struggles and successes were treated. When I struggled, it was a character flaw to be corrected. When Ashley struggled, it was a circumstance to be rescued from. The access. Here's the part that matters for this story specifically. About 4 years ago, before I really understood how bad my parents' spending habits had got, I made a mistake. My dad had just had a minor heart scare, turned out to be nothing serious, but at the time it was frightening, and in the panic of that week I added him as an authorized user on my primary checking account. The logic at the time felt sound. If something happened to me, or if he needed to help manage things while I was traveling for work, he'd have access. It was meant to be in case of emergency thing, not an active use thing. I want to be honest, I forgot about it completely. For almost 2 years I didn't think about that access at all because he never used it and I never had a reason to check. My mistake was not revoking it the moment the health scare passed. That's on me, and I've made my peace with that part. What I did not forget or forgive is what happened when he finally did use it. Ashley called my parents in April, panic. She was 3 months behind on rent, facing eviction, and this detail came out later, had also racked up almost $6,000 in credit card debt trying to keep a struggling online boutique afloat. She needed, by her own estimate, around $14,000 to get current on everything and stop the bleeding. My parents didn't have it. Their retirement accounts are modest, they're both still working in their early 60s, and they'd already helped Ashley enough times that their own savings were thin. My mom told me later, and I believe this was meant as a defense, not a confession, that they didn't want to see Ashley end up on the street. My dad logged into my checking account, which was linked to my savings account through the same bank's transfer system, and moved $14,200 out of my emergency fund and into Ashley's account. He did not ask me, he did not tell me, he did not leave a note, a text, a voicemail, nothing. I found out in the most mundane way possible, which somehow made it worse. My car, that same 2014 Civic, needed a transmission repair, $2,200. Annoying, but exactly the kind of thing an emergency fund exists for. I logged into my banking app on a Tuesday evening, fully expecting to see just over $14,000 sitting there, ready to absorb the hit without me even feeling it. The balance read $312.47. I remember staring at the screen for a solid 30 seconds, genuinely thinking it was a glitch. I refreshed the app, same number. I checked my transaction history and there it was, dated 6 weeks earlier. An outgoing transfer for $14,200, initiated from a device I didn't recognize, sent to an account ending in the same 4 digits as my sister's checking account, which I happened to remember because I'd Venmoed her money for a joint birthday gift for our mom the year before. My hands were actually shaking. I want to be clear about that, because I think people who haven't experienced financial betrayal from family sometimes assume it's just money and therefore not a big deal. It is never just money. Money in a family like mine is a language. And what that transfer said to me in a language I understood instantly and completely was, your security doesn't matter as much as her comfort. I called the bank first, thinking maybe it was fraud, an actual criminal, not my father. Rep confirmed the transfer was authorized by a listed account holder. That's when I remembered, the heart scare, the authorized user status I'd never revoked. I sat in my car in my apartment parking lot for almost 20 minutes before I called my mom. Hey sweetie, she said in the breezy tone she always used, the one that made everything sound like it was already fine before I'd even said a word. Did Dad take money out of my savings account? There was a pause. Not a long one, maybe 2 seconds, but long enough that I knew before she even answered. Okay, don't be dramatic, she said. We were going to tell you. You were going to tell me. It's been 6 weeks. Ryan, your sister was about to lose her apartment. Do you understand what that means? She would have been homeless. What were we supposed to do? Just let that happen? You could have asked me, I said. My voice was doing that thing where it goes very flat and very quiet, which anyone who knows me well will tell you is a much worse sign than yelling. It's my money. You could have called me and asked if I'd be willing to lend it. We knew you'd say no. I actually laughed at that, a short, humorless bark of a laugh because it was such a stunning thing to say out loud. So because you assumed I'd say no, you decided the answer didn't matter. You have a good job, Ryan. You don't need that money sitting there doing nothing. Your sister needed it. We'll pay you back. When? Another pause. We're working on it. They were not, it turned out, working on it in any way that resembled an actual plan. There was no repayment schedule, no written agreement. No interest. Obviously, this wasn't a loan in any structured sense, just an assumption that eventually, someday in some unspecified way, the money would find its way back to me, the same way water eventually finds its way downhill. I asked to speak to my dad. He got on the phone and, to his credit, at least didn't try to pretend it hadn't happened. But his justification was somehow worse than my mom's. You've always been good with money, he said. That's a good thing. But it also means you're in a position to help. Ashley's not like you. She needs more support. That's just how it is. That's just how it is might be the single most infuriating sentence anyone has ever said to me, and I include in that comparison a customer service rep who once told me a canceled flight was just how travel is sometimes. I told them I wanted the money back in full on a real timeline in writing. My dad said that felt insulting, like I was treating them as if they were some kind of criminals instead of family. I pointed out that what he described, accessing an account without authorization for that specific transaction and moving money out without consent, was functionally exactly what a criminal does, the only difference being that my dad happened to have residual account access from an unrelated emergency 4 years earlier. My mom told me I was twisting a family situation into something ugly. I hung up. I remember sitting in the dark in my apartment for a long time afterward, not really thinking anything coherent, just sort of vibrating with a feeling I didn't have a name for yet. It wasn't quite anger. It was closer to grief, the specific grief of realizing something you believed about your relationship with your parents was never actually true. First thing I did the next morning was revoke my dad's authorized user status and change every password associated with every account I had. I felt a little ridiculous doing it, like I was treating my own father as a security threat, but I also felt, for the first time in 6 weeks, like I had some control back. The second thing I did was talk to my fiancée, Amanda. We'd been together 3 years at that point, engaged for 4 months, and she'd heard bits and pieces of my family dynamics before but had never seen it play out in real time like this. Her reaction was honestly clarifying. She didn't say anything dramatic. She just asked very calmly, "What do you actually want to happen here?" And I realized I didn't fully know. Part of me wanted the money back. Part of me wanted an apology that felt real, not defensive. But a bigger part of me, once I sat with it, wanted something structural to change. I wanted, for the first time in my adult life, to stop being the family's emergency fund. Not just financially, emotionally too. Because here's the thing that took me a few weeks to fully articulate, even to myself. This wasn't really about the $14,000, even though that number represented years of discipline and sacrifice. It was about a pattern. My parents didn't see my stability as mine. They saw it as a shared family resource that I happened to be the custodian of. My discipline wasn't something they respected, it was something they'd learned to lean on. So I made a decision. I stopped. I stopped being available for the quick questions about whether I could spot them for a utility bill just until payday. I stopped covering the difference when my mom's car insurance renewal came due and she was a little short this month. I stopped being the person who got a text at 9 p.m. saying, "Hey, weird question, but..." The opening line that in my family always preceded a request for money. It took about 5 weeks for the fallout to arrive, and when it did, it arrived exactly as predictably as I'd feared. My mom called in early June needing $300 to cover a plumbing repair before their homeowner's insurance deductible kicked in. I said I wasn't able to help right now. She was quiet for a second and then she said something that I don't think I'll ever fully get over. "I don't understand what happened to you. You used to be so generous. Why can't you help your own family anymore?" I actually had to put the phone down for a second before I responded, because the unfairness of that question was so total, so complete, that I couldn't immediately find words for it. Why can't you help your own family anymore? As if the $14,000 had simply evaporated into thin air, unconnected to any decision anyone had made. As if I was the one who'd changed, rather than the one who'd finally stopped absorbing the consequences of a pattern I never agreed to. You took $14,000 from me without asking, I said as evenly as I could manage. You haven't paid any of it back and now you're asking why I can't help with $300. That's completely different. How is it different? Because this is an actual emergency, Ryan. The other thing was for your sister. I sat with that sentence for a long time after we hung up. This is an actual emergency. The other thing was for your sister. As if Ashley's situation hadn't been described at the time in exactly those terms, an emergency, urgent, can't wait. As if the category of real emergency only applied when it was convenient to the argument being made. Once I started paying attention, really paying attention, instead of just absorbing things the way I'd trained myself to do for 31 years, I started noticing how deep this pattern actually went. I found out through a conversation with my aunt at a family barbecue that summer that my parents had also co-signed a car loan for Ashley 2 years earlier that she defaulted on, which they'd been quietly paying off ever since. I found out they'd paid for nearly all of her wedding when she got married the year before, a wedding I'd been asked to contribute $2,000 toward, since family helps family, a phrase I now understood applied selectively. I found out that when I graduated college with no debt, working 2 jobs to make it happen, my parents had thrown a small dinner. When Ashley graduated from a 6-week online coaching certification program, they'd rented out a private room at a restaurant and invited 20 people. None of this was new information exactly. I'd witnessed all of it happen in real time over years. What was new was my willingness to actually connect the dots instead of making excuses on their behalf the way I always had. I think in some way believing my parents were fundamentally fair, even if imperfect, had been load-bearing for my whole identity. Pulling that belief out felt like it should have collapsed something. Instead, weirdly, it felt like relief, like putting down something heavy I hadn't realized I was carrying. It's been about 3 months since the transfer happened. My parents have paid back $2,000 of the $14,000 in 3 separate payments, each one accompanied by a comment about how tight things are for them right now, which I've come to understand is meant to make me feel guilty for expecting the rest. I've stopped bringing it up in every conversation, mostly because I realized the conversations weren't going anywhere productive. Instead, I sent one final message in writing laying out exactly what happened, what I expect, full repayment on a set schedule, and that until that happens I won't be extending any further financial help, full stop, no exceptions, regardless of what the emergency is framed as. My mom has told 2 different relatives that I'm punishing the family and holding a grudge. My dad hasn't brought it up again at all, which I've come to recognize as his version of hoping a problem quietly disappears if nobody names it out loud. Ashley, for what it's worth, called me once a little sheepish and said she felt bad about the whole situation. I believe she meant it honestly. I don't think this was ever really about her. She didn't ask my parents to steal from me, she asked for help and they chose the method. But I also noticed she didn't offer to pay any of it back herself, and when I gently raised that possibility the conversation got awkward fast and she changed the subject. Amanda and I have started rebuilding the emergency fund from scratch. It's slower this time, partly because we're saving for the wedding simultaneously, but also because, and I didn't expect this part, I check the balance more often now. Not out of anxiety exactly, more like I'm making sure it's still mine. I don't know if my parents will ever fully understand why this broke something that isn't going to just snap back into place. I think in their minds, family financial obligation only flows one direction. The successful kid supports the family, and questioning that flow is treated as a betrayal, rather than the original taking being the betrayal. I've stopped trying to make them see it my way. I've just stopped functioning as the answer to every financial emergency that isn't actually mine. If you told me a year ago that the biggest financial and emotional lesson of my 30s would come not from a bad investment or a job loss, but from my own parents quietly moving money out of my account for my sister, I wouldn't have believed you. But here we are. $14,200, 6 weeks of silence, and one sentence: why can't you help your own family anymore? That I don't think I'll ever be able to fully unhear. I built that fund to give myself security my family never quite gave me. It turns out I needed it more than I knew, just not for the reason I expected.